have been dealing with a lot of data lately, and I thought I'd tell you guys a little bit about some of the things I see with data breaches and some of the things I've learned, and particularly how the data breaches that regularly happen and regularly get traded around differ from what you may have seen in the press. There's some interesting things we can learn from this, and I'm currently sitting on a couple of billion records that have been traded around. In fact, it's a lot more than a couple of billion. There's a lot of records that I just simply don't have the time to go through and process. There is so much data out there, I don't have time to see it all. Now, for those of you who don't know me or where I'm going with this, I run a system called Have I Been Pwned? And what Have I Been Pwned does is it is a data breach aggregation service. So data is compromised, it's spread out around the web via a variety of means. I'm going to show you some of those shortly. I find the data when it's out there, and I go through and I look at it and say, is this legitimate? Did Dropbox get hacked or LinkedIn get hacked? And if it is, I make the data discoverable for the purpose of people finding out where they've been exposed. And very often the first that someone knows that they've been in a data breach, even if the company announced it, is when they get a notification from this system. Has anyone used this before? Whoa, okay. Most people. Who's been in, say, LinkedIn? LinkedIn was a big one. Dropbox? Ashley Madison? Almost. Now, data breaches like Ashley Madison are of a very sensitive class because people who were in those systems had a great expectation of privacy, and in fairness, people who were in all of these breach systems had an expectation of privacy. The difference being that if my wife discovers that I was in Adobe, she probably won't know what Adobe is, or she's like, oh, you like Photoshop, who cares? If she discovers I'm Ashley Madison, I've got a whole different set of explaining to do. So some of these data classes I flag as sensitive, and I make sure that you can only find out your own exposure. You can't find out other people's exposure. Now, I took this screen cap a few weeks ago before I came away. It was at 1.4 billion something accounts. Since I've been away and I've had very, very small amounts of time, it's now 1.8 billion. It just keeps growing and growing. And one of the interesting things is when I get data and it goes into this site, very often there's press coverage around the incident itself. And I think the press portrays a really interesting image of hackers. And when we go and we have a look at how does the public consequently perceive hackers as a result, we see a lot of stuff like this. These are hackers. You may notice some trends. So, what can we learn about hackers? We know that hackers have hoodies. Very important. You will see this consistently throughout the remainder of the talk. Hackers like green screens. There are tutorials from people about hacking that begin with the command colour A. Remember that one? Because you'll go green if you do that, and now you're hacking. It's all good. And they like binary. And again, you'll see these patterns again and again, and it is both alarming and hilarious how frequently they hold true. Now, obviously, this is kind of scary imagery as well, right? Like you see this, you go, oh man, these guys are a bit scary, a bit worrying. And it's not just the media that tends to misrepresent in this way. So we see dedicated security products using scary imagery. So for example, I've got a short clip here from a product called Cujo. And Cujo is security in a box. You put it in your house and hackers can't get in. It sounds wonderful. Here's how they explain it.
You may not know it, but you've probably already been hacked. Thousands of hacking attacks occur each day.
Now, firstly, how do we know he's a hacker? Hoodie, very good. Also, green screen, very good. Very important facts. Let's start to unravel the whole hacker imagery though, because one of the things that struck me when I watched this is that it seemed a little bit scarier than what it might actually be, and I thought, I've got to figure out what's going on here. And I saw a clip, just a portion of that little video, which struck me as odd. So I captured it here, and I noticed, it looks like he's hacking in a browser. And I got a bit of an idea about how these guys do this, and they don't normally use a browser with green text on it. I thought, I've got to figure this out. How is the guy hacking in the browser? So I went out there and I looked around, and I found a website. Now, all of you can do this, and when you get home, you will want to do this and show your friends. This website is called hackertyper.net. And what you do is you go to hackertyper.net, and then all you have to do is just start mashing the keyboard. And as you mash it, hacks literally appear on the screen. This is precisely what was used in the video. I went all CSI on it. I zoomed, enhanced, I matched it. It's exactly the same algorithm. The security in a box is being sold with imagery to scare you, with a hacker using a browser to hack you by mashing the keyboard. So this is a really interesting misrepresentation of what tends to actually happen. And what I find really interesting is when we start comparing it with the real world. So here's a good example, TalkTalk. TalkTalk was very big news here a year ago. We all know what happened with TalkTalk. And TalkTalk was in the news, and this detective came out and he said, we think it is Russian Islamic cyber jihadis, which is kind of terrifying. And I realised before that there are some Russian speakers here, and I apologise for the implication of this, but there's something about the accent which is scary. I'm not sure what a cyber jihadi is either, but that sounds pretty bloody scary as well. So this guy said, all right, Russian Islamic cyber jihadis, you know, lock up your children, so on and so forth. And then we found out who it was. So he was 15. I don't know, like the only thing he might have been from those words is cyber. Like that is about it. 15-year-old in his bedroom in Northern, I assume he's in his bedroom. Where else are you going to be? You're 15, you're hacking. So that was him. There was another guy, and he was a bit older. He was 16. And this was the reality, and we've since seen the wash-up of the whole TalkTalk incident. The ICO's come out with their findings. And it's kids using free software off the internet, possibly without even a hoodie. All right, which is a very, very different proposition to the way it's represented. So there's a lot of this going on. And of course, when incidents like this happen, where people break into systems, they take data out, very frequently they just want to distribute it around. Now, there is certainly nation-state sponsored stuff. We don't know if that happened with Yahoo or not. It's a little bit dog ate my homework, who knows. But very often they break in, they grab this data, and it does get distributed. And a lot of people sort of say to me then, well, you know, where does it come from? Like, how do you get it? So I want to show you a few different ways that data comes to me. And one of them is very frequently just people reaching out privately. So there's a guy who sent me an email. This was about a year ago, AAA web post. It says, hey, I've got this data out of AAA web post. I don't believe that he broke into the system. Data is traded very frequently. He says, I'm going to give you 13 million records. Here's a mega NZ link. A huge amount of the data that's sent to me, I would say 80% plus, is put on Mega. Now, Mega is the service that Kim.com created a few years back. It is actually a very good file sharing service. You get 50 gigabytes for free. You can sign up anonymously. It's fast. They've got a client to sync. It is a fairly professional service, but it's used extensively for distributing data breaches. So very often I get these private messages and I get links to Mega. Now, interestingly, this guy here, after AAA web host started getting press, because the incident is going to end up in the press when it's 13 million accounts and plain text passwords, he later on sent me a message and he said, I'm scared that they'll look for me. And this does not sound very evil cyber hackery. This sounds like a scared kid. And very often it is a scared kid. Now, I try not to ask too many questions when people send the data. I don't really want to know, did you break into the system? Did someone else break into the system? Where did you get the data? I just am interested in, is it legitimate? Where did it come from? What do we got to do to let people know? And importantly, let the company know that it happened as well. So I'll get messages from people and they'll include things like this. Now, whilst I'm doing my best not to ask where the data might have come from and if they were responsible or not, it's very hard not to draw conclusions when they're taking screen caps of them using SQL Map pulling the data out of the system. You will notice the colour did go to green before he did this as well. So, and this is what it is, and you can tell by the title bar there he's using SQL Map. I've obfuscated the URL, but it is literally SQL Map -u URL, go outside and play for a few hours, come back, here's all the data. It's a free tool, it's a very good SQL injection tool. And this is what happens, they grab data in this way. And very often I'll go back to these guys and say, look, really what you should do is you should exercise some private disclosure. You should contact the company and let them know. And I know full well they don't want to do this. That's going to be a very confrontational exercise for them. But very frequently, after I say, go and do the private disclosure thing, they'll come back and they'll go, what's that? I hadn't really even thought of that. What is this private ethical disclosure thing you speak of? And I'll have to go back to them and explain, look, get in touch with them, let them know, let them plug the hole, let's not make this any worse. And then I'll get people come back and go, all right, you want the data anyway? Why not? And there's this real sort of, it's like a laissez-faire attitude about data. And what I'm finding is that there are so many people trading so much data around that it's almost like they've lost the context of how important billions of personal records are, because it's not just email addresses and passwords. It's genders, birth dates, sexual orientations, things that are deeply, deeply personable and irrevocable. This is not just about change your password and it goes away. So I'm very careful with these guys. I always go back and say, look, you've got to do the right thing. I don't want Have I Been Pwned to become your mechanism of broadcasting to the world that you're an elite cyber hacker. This is not the point of the project. Now, other times I will find data in sites like this. There's a ClearWeb website. It's sitting out there protected by Cloudflare. And you can go and download hundreds of millions of records from these sites. Multiple different data breaches just sitting out there. Anyone can go and grab it. So there are a lot of websites like this. There are a lot of websites that are sitting behind invitation-only forums. There are even more websites, again, that sit behind Tor hidden services. There is data everywhere that is so easy to find, it still just blows my mind that it's spread that far and wide. So one of the other things that sort of comes as a result of these incidents is when we look at the way organisations respond. And look, let's face it, it's not a nice thing. You've just been hacked, you've learned that your data is out there, what are you now going to say? And I think a lot of organisations have never thought about that. They have never expected that eventuality to happen, and they react in a very reactionary fashion, not a well thought through fashion. And a couple of recent incidents sort of brought this to my mind, how bad we are at communicating. And one of them was from a service called Lifeboat. And Lifeboat does Minecraft servers. And this data popped up earlier on in the year, had a look at it, it's legitimate, about 7 million records. It ended up in the press, and Lifeboat gave a comment to the media. And what they said in their comment was that they knew the site was hacked months earlier. They knew. And they decided not to tell anyone, not to save their own asses, but because if they told people, then the hackers would act faster. That was their rationale. We're doing this for you because if hackers know that these are your passwords, they're going to go and exploit them because they're going to think that you're going to come and change. It doesn't work like that. You get a whole stash of passwords like this and people are going to want to exploit them as fast as possible. Here's another thing to think about. Lifeboat had Lifeboat members' email addresses and passwords. They also had Google email addresses and passwords, Facebook email addresses and passwords, banking email addresses and passwords, because people are reusing credentials. We know this. It's a social norm. So their responsibility really extends beyond their website. Another one, this one is very recent. So this guy popped up on Twitter and he said, here's 324,000 BlueSnap payment records. BlueSnap is a payment processor. Mega NZ links are the normal thing. And when I had a look at this data, there was a lot in there. 324,000 records like this. This was only about 20% of one record. Everything obfuscated in grey is personally identifiable info, names, address, phone number. Everything in red is credit card data. The red arrow is CVV. 324,000 records with CVV in plain text out there on the web. And it took me many tries to be really, really confident that it was CVVs, because I think some of you know what it means if you have CVVs that are unencrypted and put on a public web server. So I got in contact with both BlueSnap and another company who I suspected it may have come from. It wasn't quite clear from the data, a company called RegPack. And in fact, I thought it was RegPack because they did like registration and then BlueSnap did processing. And I got comments from both of them before I wrote it all up and sort of said, look, no one wants to admit that they lost the data, so here are the facts. We'll see where this goes. And Regpack gave me this comment and they said, we've conclusively determined that our servers are not involved. Conclusively. That was a very emphatic term to use. Until the next day, and they changed their mind. And they said, well, actually, funny thing, well, they didn't say funny thing, I don't think they were very amused. But this thing happened, and we've actually decided that we put all this decrypted data up there on the web. Now, you or I might look at this and go, okay, well, you know, you've had a data breach, that's not good. But they said no. Regpack servers were not breached. They were very emphatic. They were not breached. And reasonable people like us would then say, well, what was it if you weren't breached and you lost 324,000 records? It was a data incident. Don't say breach, not allowed to say breach. Very, very emphatic about that. And I think there is one large 3-letter acronymed organisation they were very worried about around about that time. So we see a lot of incidents like this with companies. Now, to try and sort of turn this around on a slightly lighter note, because frankly it does get a bit depressing seeing all of these breached systems, I'm finding it increasingly amusing how these incidents are covered. And look, we'll see a lot of stuff like this. I mean, we've got to have good imagery, right? Like stock photos in security stories are a very important thing. And it's getting harder, right? Because there are so many security incidents that the media industry needs to innovate. And we've gone from hoodies to hoodies and masks as one of the transitions I've noticed. They've gotten a lot more creative as well. So recently we had this guy. And I think we can all learn something from this. And as best I can tell, like the guy gets a bucket of dormant cyber pathogens or something, he goes into the data center and he just spreads them and they crawl up around. And all of this makes me a lot happier because there's amusing sides to it. And then something happened this year, an incident that, in my experience at least, was unprecedented. And the media had a bit of a field trip with the way they described it. And I'm going to give you this headline. It's not a headline I expected to see my name in. Now, if you are not familiar with the term, do not Google it. Not here. And my parents, like, they've read the news and stuff I tweet, and my mother's like, so I saw you in a story the other day. Oh, shit. But here was the challenge, right? Because how is the media going to choose stock photos for this? Because this is a very delicate issue, but the register here rose to the occasion. And I try and keep things a little bit lighter, otherwise the whole data breach thing can just get a little bit depressing. So on that note, thank you very much.
So Troy, you breached your own security by showing your Hotmail address on one of your slides, and I've just been looking it up. And have I been pwned?
So
you've been breached 7 times. LinkedIn, Dropbox, Tumblr, a web host, Adobe, Patreon. I haven't seen a fisting website. But
no, that's marked as sensitive. But you wouldn't believe why.
You are at the heart of this, yet you are vulnerable. How do you protect yourself?
Well, you know, the thing with those incidents, like I have a Dropbox account, I have an Adobe account, I have all the sorts of accounts that people would normally have. But I do all the fundamental things that I think everyone here knows we should do, although possibly doesn't. I have a password manager, I have multi-step verification on everything, as frustrating as that can be on occasion. But as a consumer, there's not a whole lot more we can do with that, other than also being very conscious about choosing what I want to share. So I have photos of my family on Facebook that might be marked as private, available to friends, but if they go public, they're not going to upset me. So I'm just conscious that everything I digitise I may one day lose as well.
So what, based on all your knowledge, should the regulators, should the governments be doing?
So I guess to answer that in a roundabout way, I think what we're not doing so well is disincentivising organisations from creating these vulnerable systems. So when we look at TalkTalk, the ICO just handed them down a fine which equates to 0.02% of their annual revenue. So you could get owned by 15 and a 16-year-old kid by obviously having egregious security flaws, which was the case, and the total sum of the impact on that is an amount of money that if any of us lost 0.02% of our personal revenue, it's probably like a night out with a good meal. I mean, it's a small amount of money. So I don't think there's enough disincentive at the moment.
Last question for me. We talked about incentive earlier on. So this is taking a lot of your own time, and I guess it's a public service telling people stuff they probably didn't want to know. What is driving you to build Have I Been Pwned into such a huge project?
So there are a couple of things initially, and one of them was that I just had a genuine curiosity about the frequency of data breaches and the prevalence of individuals. And anyone who follows the Have I Been Pwned Twitter account may note that every time I do put a new breach, I state what percentage of accounts are already in there, because that's one of the things that I find very interesting. And the other side of things is like many technical people, I like building stuff. And when there was an opportunity to build something that I thought was going to get a lot of use, I thought that would be a good project. And what I didn't realize at the time, but now this has helped the other side of my life, the more commercial side, where I do a lot of training, because organisations call me up and say, can you come and help train our developers, because we don't want to end up on Have I Been Pwned. So, okay, well, that worked out all right, sure.
IPO next time we meet. Thank you, Troy Hunt.